Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's workshop, Letters of Recommendation, Who and How to Ask. My name is Melissa Berkey, and I'm the Assistant Director in the Office of Undergraduate Research. And I'm excited to have two colleagues joining me today. First, we have a colleague from the Pre-Professional Advising Office. Krista, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name's Krista. I work in pre-professional advising, and if you are pre-medical or pre-dental, I will be jumping in at certain points throughout this presentation to offer that perspective.
Thank you. And we have one of our peer research ambassadors from the Office of Undergraduate Research. Lily, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Lily Zong. I am a senior majoring in physiology and neurobiology and minoring in English. And I'm headed to UConn Medical School this fall. So I have done a lot with recommendations, whether it was through research or med school. So I think this is going to be a very valuable presentation for everybody.
Thank you. Okay, so a couple of housekeeping notes as we dive into today's workshop. First thing, this is a live session, so we do want to answer your questions as we go. If you can please put your questions in the Q&A, that way we can all see those questions and we'll either answer them directly in the Q&A or we might incorporate them into the discussion if it's something that we think a lot of students are going to have that same question. But we do want to make sure we're answering your questions. Don't be shy. Please put those out there in the Q&A. Okay, other thing I want to mention as we get started talking about letters of recommendation, we've really designed this workshop to be widely applicable to the different types of opportunities that you may be applying for, from OUR funding programs and summer research programs to internships or jobs or even graduate school. Because regardless of the type of opportunity you're applying for, the ways in which you approach this process and the etiquette of asking for a letter of recommendation, that doesn't change. So what are we going to be talking about today? So we're going to be discussing why letters of recommendation matter. From there, we're going to discuss who and how to ask, and following up with your recommenders, and end with pitfalls to avoid along the way. Okay, so to start off with, why are letters of recommendation so important? Why does this matter? What is the purpose of a letter of recommendation? So letters of recommendation allow admissions, selection, or hiring committees to understand your strengths and weaknesses from another perspective, going beyond the insights that you provide on your application. They also give insight into your accomplishments, bringing the academic preparations and experiences that are outlined in your transcripts and on your resume to life. These letters carry weight. A well-written letter of recommendation from a mentor who can speak to your preparation and the fit between the opportunity and your goals can positively impact the outcome of your application. And vice versa, a lackluster recommendation or one that contradicts the picture that you're painting with your application can work against you. Do not discount the importance of these letters of recommendation. They really do matter in the application process. So who should you ask? It's always a question that people have, right? When you're starting to look at different applications that you're preparing, who are you supposed to ask for a letter of recommendation? So when determining who to ask, you first need to consider the opportunity and who is best positioned to speak to your qualifications for that opportunity. Each program or opportunity can set their own parameters for recommendation letters. Sometimes this is very open-ended, leaving it up to you to determine who would be the most appropriate person or people to write on your behalf. Other times there are very specific criteria for who should submit a recommendation that you need to make note of. For example, they may ask you to provide a recommendation from a faculty member in your major or perhaps from a research mentor. But it is essential that you read the guidance from the program or the opportunity and follow their instructions. In general, people who you may consider asking include professors, a PI or a research mentor, a program mentor or advisor, perhaps someone who has overseen volunteer activities or leadership activities that you're a part of, or even a supervisor from an internship or a job that you've held. But again, make sure you read the criteria. Krista, just thinking about like medical, dental school, what are some of the criteria for students applying for those types of programs?
Sure thing. And I will mention as well, if we have anyone who's thinking of applying to the upcoming 2022 application cycle, we will be holding our 2022 cycle application orientation this Wednesday at 6 p.m. The details went out in our newsletter a little while ago, and you can find more info on our website as well. So we will be covering these kinds of topics along with more general application procedures and timelines at that session. But just as a little heads up, so most of our med and dent applicants from UConn do average about 5 to 7 individual letters of rec. That's a lot. And, you know, the schools do vary a bit in terms of what they're looking for, but just to be as well-rounded as possible, we do have some recommendations. So we do recommend that you obtain letters from about 2 science faculty, 1 non-science faculty, if possible, that demonstrates some good breadth to your coursework. At least 1 clinician, so typically someone you've shadowed, but someone who's seen you in that clinical setting. So if you're applying to MD programs, for example, an MD letter would be ideal. There are some DO programs that actually require a letter from a DO as well, just as a heads up. If you are involved in research, then a research PI letter. And then lastly, 1 or 2 character references. And by that, I mean people who know you in something of a supervisory type role, and they can really vouch for your professionalism, personal attributes, and maybe give examples of any of those 15 core competencies you will hear our office talk about. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. Okay, but thinking beyond who can write a letter of recommendation on your behalf, it's essential to think about who are the best people to write a recommendation letter for you. Now, faculty members most commonly write letters of recommendation. However, other professionals who may know you well and who have supervised your work in academic settings or research settings might also be appropriate choices. You know, for faculty recommendations, the people you ask should know you well, ideally beyond your performance in one course. If their only knowledge of you is through attendance and performance in a large class, then your recommenders will likely have little to say other than kind of generic comments about your academic ability. It's essential to interact with your professors, to ask questions, to attend office hours, and if you can, try and get involved in their work, you know, perhaps assist with their research in some way. This will help you to get to know your professors, and in turn, they're going to get to know you. That knowledge can translate into an enthusiastic and detailed letter of recommendation. You know, the strongest recommendations are going to come from people who can provide those detailed examples of how you've demonstrated the skills and attributes required for the opportunity you're seeking. They should be able to incorporate their knowledge of your background, your goals, and your preparations, and say how those connect to the opportunity that you're applying for. You don't just want them to say that you have particular skills, but you want them to be able to demonstrate that. That really helps bring your candidacy to life. So we also have students who wonder whether they should ask a well-known professor, you know, someone with the highest title, or a professor who knows them better. So letters by a well-known professor only carry more weight if the professor really knows you well and can write that substantial and detailed letter of recommendation. Now, you also need to choose people who can speak positively about your work and your qualifications. If you feel they don't know you well enough or can only provide that lackluster recommendation, maybe kind of a cursory statement of your qualifications, you know, like, she was in my course, did well on assignments, contributed to the discussions, got an A in the class. If that is all they can say about you, if you're not sure if they can say anything beyond that, then we would recommend you consider other recommenders. Again, this is all about getting that substantive, detailed recommendation from people who really do know you. The more detailed and personalized and enthusiastic a letter of recommendation is, the more likely it is to make a strong impression on a selection or an admissions committee. Okay, who not to ask. This is important. Recommenders need to be able to provide unbiased opinions of your preparations and potential. Family members and friends are not able to provide an unbiased recommendation. Having a family member or friend or even another undergraduate student submit a letter on your behalf will not be viewed favorably in this process. Also, you want to avoid people who only know you in an unrelated capacity. You need to consider how relevant their recommendation is going to be. For example, you may have a great relationship with your supervisor at the rec center, but that person may not be the best person to write a letter of recommendation if you're applying for funding to support a research project you're doing in an MCB lab. You do need to think about how relevant their knowledge of your abilities really is to the opportunity that you're applying for. Okay, so now we're going to go into the process of asking for the letter of recommendation. How do you approach this process? So the first thing we really want to emphasize, start early. The sooner the better. It is common courtesy to give recommenders at least 3 weeks to prepare a letter of recommendation, ideally longer. The amount of advance notice you can provide may vary. I understand that. You might be looking at an opportunity that has a deadline coming up in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Sometimes it can't be avoided, but if it can be avoided, please try and ask for these letters as early as possible. So for those of you who are looking ahead to graduate school, the medical school, dental school applicants that are tuning into this presentation, you can and should plan that out well in advance, especially if you're asking very popular or active faculty who are likely writing for multiple students. Some faculty have very busy seasons when everyone is asking them for letters of recommendation. So it is absolutely essential to plant these seeds far in advance. You want to begin setting up meetings with faculty as soon as you decide to apply for an opportunity to gauge their willingness to write a letter on your behalf. So these conversations with faculty will also give you an opportunity to get feedback on your application materials from a faculty perspective. Their insights are valuable. Sharing your application materials can help them to prepare a stronger recommendation letter as well. Reach out to them through email. In the email, you can start to prime the conversation by providing some general insight into the purpose of the meeting. Speaking from the perspective of someone who's written many letters of recommendation over the years, I appreciate that heads up. That way I can be prepared for the conversation. I can be prepared to accept the recommendation request or perhaps to decline the recommendation request. If I plan to accept that recommendation request from the student, it gives me time to really think about my interactions with that student. How well I know them, and whether or not there are questions that I want to ask them that will help me prepare a strong letter of recommendation on their behalf. You never just want to show up to a faculty member's office or pop into office hours and dive right into asking for a recommendation. Always set up a meeting in advance. Now, just one note for those of you who are remote for the semester, these meetings can be done virtually. You don't have to do this in person. You can still initiate these conversations, have these meetings through WebEx, through Google Meet, through Zoom, whichever platform you use. This is definitely something you can do from anywhere. Krista, any thoughts just for students who are applying to medical or dental school in terms of the timeline for asking for letters of recommendation?
This is actually a very good time right now to at least start getting on some faculty's radars, especially in the hard sciences, just because of the number that they receive. So even just sending that initial email, which we'll talk about, hoping to connect and getting on their radar. In reality, we don't need the letters fully received until typically early June-ish. So we'll talk about that more on Wednesday. But it's very common for faculty as well to focus on teaching for the duration of the semester, and then after the semester ends to then change focus and begin writing letters of rec around that time. I do want to echo something Melissa said earlier as well, because I've seen hundreds of letters come in for our Med and Dent applicants the last 5 years. And I really can't state the importance of getting people who know you to write the letters. I have seen letters that simply say, the student earned an A in my class, please contact me for further information, which does not add anything to an application. And in fact, we probably wouldn't even want to include that in the applicant's packet. On the other hand, a letter for a student in a class who perhaps received a slightly lower grade, but who made a constant effort to go to office hours, to ask questions, demonstrate intellectual curiosity, and then really display that hard work, resilience, one of those core competencies, that makes for a much better and telling letter about the student's aptitude and potential work ethic for when they're actually in professional school. So please just keep that in mind moving forward. If I could, Lily, would you like to jump in if you can roughly remember when you started asking your recommenders last cycle?
Sure. So my situation was a little bit different because I studied abroad my junior spring. And so I kind of pushed my timeline a little bit earlier so that I could be on the professor's radar before leaving, especially so I could meet face to face. That's a little different now. But I reached out around November, December of my junior year with just a meeting request. And that kind of turned into a conversation about letters and kind of getting that or getting myself on the radar. And then later on, once I had my personal statement completed, that was around February or March, I could give them my personal statement, my transcript, as well as my MCAT score and more details about my resume. And so I kind of gave all of that information at once so that they could kind of have everything together to write the letter.
Lily, you're leading us nicely into the next portion about preparing for those meetings. So this is a wonderful segue into that. But real quick, I do want to put up something on the slide here. This is a sample email. I know a lot of students, as they start to reach out to faculty, they sometimes wonder, what am I supposed to say in this email? How am I supposed to start this conversation and initiate these meetings? So this is a template that we have that I'm actually going to be putting up on the OUR website, hopefully today or tomorrow, as soon as I can carve out a few minutes to do that. But this will be up there just to give you an idea of how you can structure this email, the email that you're using to reach out for these meeting requests with faculty. So look for this on the website, and I will share this with you, Krista, as well, once that is up. Okay, so talking about preparing for these conversations. You know, preparing for these conversations is in many ways similar to preparing for a job interview. You need to be prepared to talk about the program or the opportunity that you're applying for, why you're interested in that opportunity or that program, and how it fits with your goals. You need to be prepared to discuss why you're going to ask that specific recommender to write a letter on your behalf, why you've chosen them, and how you feel a recommendation from them will contribute to your application. You know, consider the conversations that you've had with them previously, any advice or guidance or support that they've provided, the ways in which they have shaped your academic career and your goals. Prepare to discuss the impact that they have had on you. That really sets the stage in this conversation for the ask, you know, asking that important question as to whether or not they'd be willing to write a recommendation on your behalf. You want to be prepared to discuss the specific skills and attributes or experiences that you would like them to emphasize in their letter, and the ways in which their letter is going to be different from others. Now, I know, Krista, you've mentioned kind of the competencies, the core competencies. How does that play into this as students are preparing for these conversations and thinking about the skills and attributes they want to ask recommenders to emphasize? How do competencies come into play?
The professional school admissions committees have largely been focusing on these competencies, especially in light of the pandemic. Since if you're not able to get a certain kind of clinical experience at the moment, they're more invested in the fact that you've managed to stay engaged in some form. And so almost anything you're doing, you can connect back to these core competencies and then translate that into skills you would need or use as a physician or dentist. So if you haven't looked at them for a while, haven't tuned into one of our group advising sessions, please Google 15 core competencies, AAMC. We'll be walking you through these guys as well as part of our coaching process this month. But I am dropping a link in the chat box here to a newly updated page on our website, along with a brochure that you can, it's actually in the link that letter writers will receive when you request a letter, which details the competencies. And then if you could maybe provide guidance to your letter writer of 1 to 3 competencies that you feel you really demonstrate, that could really help guide their writing potentially, and help them think of specific examples of times when you've demonstrated those areas. So again, I'm dropping a link right in the chat box right here. This is information you and letter writers will receive down the road as well, but this is just the permanent location on our website.
Oh, thank you, Krista. Okay, you also want to prepare materials in advance of the conversation. And I know Lily mentioned work that she did to prepare for the conversation, and part of that was gathering her materials so that she could share those with her recommenders during the meeting. So you want to make it very easy on your recommenders by having all of these materials organized and prepared in advance. You want to have an updated copy of your resume, as well as any application materials that indicate your interest in the opportunity, as well as your aspirations, such as the statement of purpose, a personal statement, cover letter. It can be called something a little different depending on the application. You also want to consider providing an unofficial transcript so they can get a full picture of your academic preparations. It's important to include a description of the research opportunity, the position, the fellowship, the graduate program to which you're applying, so that they can understand what the program is emphasizing and what they're looking for. That also helps them tailor their letter accordingly. If the program provides any specific guidance for recommenders, specific prompts or questions that they want recommenders to answer in their letters, give them that information as well. Just speaking for the Office of Undergraduate Research, for our funding programs, we have all of that information tied to each specific program. So for the IDEA grant, there's a PDF that students can download and provide their recommenders with the specific prompts, things that we want them to address in their letter of recommendation. So it is important to make sure that you're providing them with these key details so that they can make sure they're tailoring their letters accordingly. If you're not currently taking classes with that particular faculty member, consider providing materials relating to the course. If you've taken a course with them in a prior semester, any graded assignments to remind them of your academic potential, that's something that can really be beneficial as they're looking to prepare that application, or sorry, the recommendation on your behalf. And you also want to provide information on how they can submit the letter of recommendation. Oftentimes it's going to be something that's done electronically. There's going to be a system they need to upload it into, or a place they need to email that letter of recommendation. But you want to make this as easy as possible on them. Let them know what this process looks like. Let them know if they're going to get a separate email with a link. If this happens to be an opportunity that requires a hard copy letter, this is becoming definitely rare at this point. Most of these are done electronically. But if you happen to be looking at one that does require a hard copy letter, you would want to provide them with an envelope that is already addressed and stamped that they can use to submit that on your behalf. So this is all about being as organized as possible up front and making sure that your recommenders have everything they need to write a compelling, substantive, detailed, meaningful letter on your behalf. Okay, now it's time to put all that preparation to good use. Have that conversation where you're asking for a letter of recommendation. And again, for those of you who are remote for the semester, you can do this from anywhere. You don't have to have a face-to-face. You can do this virtually. So first thing, you want to set the tone by being on time to your meeting, again, whether it's in person or virtual, and being prepared for that conversation. I recommend you always begin the meeting by thanking the faculty member for taking the time to talk with you. And then from there, be prepared to share information on the programs or the opportunities that you're applying to, as well as your interest in those opportunities and any preparations or related experiences. You want to be prepared to discuss why you're approaching them specifically and ask if they would be willing to write a letter on your behalf. For example, my other recommenders are very familiar with my academic abilities, but as my research mentor, you are the person who I feel who can best speak to my dedication and persistence and adaptability in the face of challenges. Be prepared to have these conversations and kind of lead them down that path, mentioning specifics about why you think they would be the best person to write. If they say yes, then you can move forward with sharing all the materials that you prepared, such as your resume and the drafts of your application materials, information on the programs and the opportunities that you're applying for, as well as the specific details on how they can submit and the deadline for submitting those letters of recommendation. Okay, one thing we want to note, confidential versus non-confidential. So recommenders may ask you if the letter is confidential or non-confidential. So what does this mean? This is something that you will encounter when applying for graduate programs in particular, as well as potentially fellowships or assistantships. So when you're applying to graduate school, programs will require you to decide whether to waive or retain your right to see your letters of recommendation. Choosing to keep letters confidential means that you, the applicant, cannot see the letters that were submitted on your behalf, whereas non-confidential means that you are able to view the letters that were submitted on your behalf. Now, programs and recommenders tend to prefer confidential letters as they feel it really displays more confidence on the part of the applicant and that it allows recommenders to be more candid and honest in their assessment of applicants than they would be if it was a non-confidential letter. For OUR funding programs, letters are automatically confidential. They are submitted by recommenders and applicants cannot view them. And I know Krista can back me up on this one, but for the pre-professional students, the pre-professional advising staff always recommend that you waive your right to see the letters because some programs won't accept them if you don't waive that right.
Yes, you want to. Not only because most programs do explicitly require you to waive your right, but just talking with a lot of admissions folks, they just say if they see a letter or if they see that a student has not waived their right, they will just automatically put the letter aside. They won't even look at it. So it's always in your best interest to waive your right.
Mm-hmm. What if they say no? This is always the dreaded part of this process. If you go into a meeting with someone that you're asking them to submit a letter of recommendation on your behalf and they say no, do not take it personally. Yes, it stings. I know that it stings. But there are many reasons why a potential recommender may deny your request. Faculty and administrators take the responsibility of writing a letter of recommendation very seriously. A recommendation represents their professional integrity. Recommendations need to be objective and specific. If they don't feel that they can write a substantive letter of recommendation, they may say no. So why are they potentially going to deny your request? Again, if they do not feel they can speak favorably on your behalf, if they don't feel like they know you well enough to write a specific substantive recommendation with concrete examples, if they have insufficient knowledge about the position or the program that you're applying to, or feel that the assessment that they can provide is not going to be relevant to that opportunity, they may say no. It's important to respect their decision and to accept this graciously. You want to use this as an opportunity to learn and to grow. Ask for feedback on what you can do to enhance your background and prepare for similar opportunities in the future. Ask for their feedback. At the conclusion of the conversation, make sure to take the time to thank them. Thank them for taking the opportunity to speak with you, and make sure to send that follow-up email to them and reiterate your thanks. You want to keep the door open for future conversations, because just because they said no once, that's not something that should deter you from continuing to build a relationship with that faculty member. Because over time, as you get to know them better, as you have more opportunities to take further courses with them, maybe get involved with them in other ways in their research, you may be able to build that relationship, and maybe they will be able to write for you in the future. So be very aware of not burning bridges with this, and just accept it graciously. Again, that's the part of the conversation I know nobody likes to have, right? Okay, following up. So after you secure a commitment from a recommender to write on your behalf, you do want to reiterate your thanks. Make sure to send them a thank you email. Let them know that you appreciate their support. And again, provide them with any details that they are going to need moving forward to write that substantive, compelling letter on your behalf. Provide that follow-up information so they know where and how, and most importantly, when to submit that letter of recommendation. You want to make this very easy on them and be detailed and organized and prepared. As the deadline approaches, you want to politely follow up with gentle reminders to make sure that your recommendation letter is not forgotten. We know that faculty are very busy people. They have so many different responsibilities on their plate. The reminders are important. Okay, so polite reminders. Make sure that you are doing that. Once the letter has been submitted, make sure to thank your recommender. Let them know you do appreciate them submitting a letter on your behalf. It does take a lot of time for people to write these letters, so it is important to express your thanks. And make sure you're letting them know what happens. Make sure you are updating them on the applications that you've submitted. If you get good news, share that good news with them. If you do not, hear back from these programs, or maybe you hear back and it's a negative, you do want to still have that conversation with your recommenders about that application. They may be able to provide you some wonderful advice and feedback to help you move forward from there. But don't be afraid to share the results of the application. Your recommenders really are there to support you, and they can provide some wonderful feedback and perspective that can help you determine your next steps. And you want to make sure to continue to cultivate that connection. Don't just disappear until you need another recommendation. Continue to stay in touch and have those periodic check-in conversations and emails. Now, speaking as a recommender, nothing bothers me more than when I spend hours preparing a detailed letter of recommendation and the student never tells me what happens. It is so frustrating. I want to share in the success of the students that I'm writing on their behalf. I want to know what happens with these applications. So please just make sure to keep your letters of recommendation, your writers, in the loop on this process. Okay, a couple of pitfalls to avoid. So asking potential recommenders with the highest title versus those who know you best. I think we've reiterated the importance of having letters from people who can speak to your abilities, your potential, who can give concrete examples and write those substantive, meaningful, and thoughtful letters. The title matters less than the content. So I would really encourage you to focus on the people who can really speak to you and your abilities and your potential. Waiting until the last minute. These letters do take time for people to write. And honestly, if you do wait until the last minute, there's the potential for someone to say no, that they're unable to accommodate that request. So do your best to ask people with as far in advance as you possibly can. Give them as much notice as possible so that they can spend time writing that meaningful letter on your behalf. Not providing enough information to your recommender. Make sure they know about these programs and opportunities that you're applying to so that they can tailor their letters accordingly. So they can make sure they're addressing the specific skills and attributes and experiences that are relevant and applicable to that opportunity. And asking a recommender whose knowledge of you, your skills and attributes does not correspond to the opportunity you're applying to. Again, you need to make sure that the people who are writing really can speak to relevant experiences and skill sets. That is going to make for a more substantive letter that is going to strengthen your application in the long run.
Melissa,
Go ahead. Yep.
I'm sorry, if I could jump in. Someone had asked a question a while ago, which connects back to the third point on there, about providing information to your letter writers. So someone asked, if I'm applying to 12 graduate schools, do I need to write 12 paragraphs to describe each of these programs to my professors? Just in my personal experience, when I had a very similar situation with a student not that long ago, she provided me with some bulleted highlights of each program, just their core mission as a program, their core experiential learning opportunities, you know, whatever their focus was. I found that very, very helpful. So I don't think you need to necessarily write a full well-composed paragraph for each program, but maybe a bulleted list would be helpful. And just in my experience, that way I was able to actually tweak their letter for each of these different programs to, you know, just show how good of an applicant and how relevant her skills were for each of these programs.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that completely. The bulleted lists are so helpful. Don't make it hard on your recommenders. Yeah, 12 separate paragraphs, you know, well-written paragraphs. That's great, but that takes a lot of time for them to sift through that information. So a couple of nice bulleted, quick overviews of key details, that is really going to make it a lot easier for your recommenders to craft those letters. But it is important to explain how these programs are different, you know, and why you're interested in each of those specific programs so that they can tailor those letters accordingly. But yeah, bulleted lists, I'm a huge fan. Is there anything else coming in through the chat or Q&A that we need to address before we go into our last pitfall slide?
I think we've been hitting them all, but I thought that one was a good one that could apply to a lot of people.
Definitely, yeah, because a lot of people are applying for multiple programs and opportunities. Okay, so a couple more pitfalls and common mistakes. Never assume a professor or advisor will be willing to write a letter. You know, you always want to ask first. You know, this is a mistake that I have seen students make, and I've even experienced as a recommender. You know, you don't want to assume that someone's going to write a letter without having that conversation, no matter how well you know them. When a recommender agrees to write a letter on your behalf, that agreement also does not extend beyond the programs or opportunities that you're discussing. If after the conversation you determine that there are other opportunities or programs that you want to apply for, you need to reach back out to your recommender and discuss those programs and ask for their willingness to prepare recommendations for those programs. And you never want to put someone's name down as a reference or a recommender if they have not agreed to serve in that capacity. Again, no matter how well you know that person and how confident you are that they are going to agree to be a recommender. And the last one, this is a very important part. You know, cultivating relationships with faculty and with other professionals takes time. The most meaningful and impactful letters are written by people who have had multiple substantive interactions with you. Building connections and relationships is something that I encourage students to begin doing early on in their academic careers. And, you know, working to sustain and maintain those relationships as you progress, that is really important to do. So for those of you who are first-year students or sophomores, start now. Go to office hours, virtual, in person, it doesn't matter. Go to office hours, get to know your faculty. Talk to them about something beyond an assignment or an exam. Ask them about their research, their scholarship. Ask about their career path. Get to know them as people. They will in turn get to know you, your goals, your interests, your strengths, and they're going to be able to provide meaningful guidance and support as you work towards those goals. These open, authentic conversations that you have with mentors can really help guide your direction, help you clarify your path, open the door to opportunities, and lay that foundation for letters of recommendation. Juniors and seniors, it's not too late, but you need to start now in cultivating these relationships. Don't be afraid to reach out to faculty and advisors to have these conversations about your goals and interests. But you don't want to wait until you need a recommendation to begin that process. You do want to start this early, cultivating those relationships, because it can take time. Okay? Okay, so we're just going to do a quick plug for our office and resources, and then I'm going to open it back up to more questions. So if you have questions, now is a great time to start throwing those in the Q&A. So real quick, Office of Undergraduate Research, just a plug for who we are and the services that we offer. So we do have one-on-one advising appointments and drop-in as well. So if you have questions about this process, navigating, how to go about building these relationships and connections with faculty in anticipation of asking for letters of recommendation, you can always schedule a meeting with us. We have the OUR advisors, the professional staff that have meetings with students, as well as our peer research ambassadors. Lily is one of 12 students that work in our office. They have all gone through this process of building relationships with faculty, reaching out for letters of recommendation. They understand this process and can certainly share their experiences going through that. We also have a lot of resources on our website, ugradresearch.uconn.edu. I'm going to be updating the letters of recommendation page shortly with the information that we've been talking about in these workshops, as well as that template that I had on an earlier slide. So you can use that as you're beginning the outreach to faculty to set up these conversations to talk about letters of recommendation. And just thinking about the enrichment programs unit as a whole, Office of Undergraduate Research is one of a number of different offices that all partner in supporting students as you're looking to get involved in activities and experiences that enrich your undergraduate experience and prepare for the next steps. So we have, as you can see from this chart, Office of Undergraduate Research, as well as our colleagues in Office of National Scholarships and Fellowships, Pre-Professional Advising, the University Scholar Program, Honors Program, and the Individualized and Interdisciplinary Major Program. So we all work together in concert to really support students and help you enrich your undergraduate experience. So if you have questions about any of these areas, all of the staff in these offices do meet with students. You can always reach out, and we are here as a unit to support you. Okay, I do want to open it up for questions and see Krista, Lily, any thoughts, feedback, comments that you want to include?
Yes, so I think I see three questions that have now come in. I will take the first one because it's about medical school specifically, and then maybe I'll just read the other two and you can chime in. So the first one I see is, if we do not know specific medical schools we're applying to, should we just describe medical school in general and why we are applying? So actually, a good point to clarify here is that when you apply to medical school, you're applying through a common application service. They're kind of like a go-between. It's kind of like the Common App when you're applying for undergrad institutions. So actually, your letter writers will only need to write one letter for medical school, and then that one letter gets shipped out to all programs. So you actually don't want to have them reference a particular medical school or dental school in that letter. Most letter writers will just begin their letter by saying, I am writing this recommendation for so-and-so who is applying to medical school, and leave it general. And then in the rest of the letter, they can focus on things, whether they know you in an academic setting or a clinical setting, research, or one of those character references. It is possible to ask for an individual letter of recommendation and then send that one separately on its own to a specific medical school, if they really want to highlight a connection you have there or that kind of thing. But most of the letters you're getting should be just generally geared towards medical school. And that language will be in the message that your letter writers receive when you request the letter through our electronic portal. All right, thank you. The next question that I see If I would like to ask one of my current semester professors for a letter of rec, should I ask now or at the end of the semester? Maybe Melissa, would you like to take that?
I think now is a great time to start to cultivate that relationship, to get to know them, to go to office hours, to build a connection, have some of that baseline foundational conversations about your interests, what type of opportunities you might be looking at in the future. That way, when you need that letter of recommendation, and it sounds like you probably don't need it till closer to the end of the semester, then you are in a better position to make that ask. So I don't recommend asking, if you don't know what you're applying to yet, you don't need to ask them way in advance for a letter of recommendation, but it is something that now is the time to start cultivating that relationship, building that connection, so that way when you have the specific opportunities you're going to be applying to, and you know what those letters of recommendation you're going to need and when they're going to be due, you already have that foundation, that connection to the faculty member, and that's someone you can go to ask for that recommendation. I hope I answered the question as it was.
Thank you. Okay, our last question that I see right now, what are some ways to re-cultivate relationships with faculty in an online environment? How would you suggest approaching a faculty member to discuss career goals or to build relationships? Lily, if I'm not putting you on the spot, I think you could probably answer this the best of any of us.
Sure. So in terms of starting early, if you're still a freshman or sophomore, not that it's ever too late, really, like Melissa said, going to those office hours, it can be very, very intimidating, especially if you don't think you have particularly specific questions, but just going to kind of introduce yourself and maybe ask them a little bit about the work, or if you do have questions about the class or questions about your own future. A lot of the times my professors became mentors just because they were able to kind of talk me through my goals, my career goals, and how I want to kind of get to that point. And then your question about recultivating that relationship. I send a lot of emails nowadays. Email seems to be the best, and really just checking in, saying hi, maybe providing updates. Like for my recommenders, after I heard about or figured out where I was going to go next, I made sure to update all of my recommenders about that and really just keep in touch more than just so you could have the recommendation, really just to continue that relationship going.
I think, Lily, you're bringing up some great points about staying in touch with faculty. If someone writes a letter of recommendation for you, you do want to continue to maintain and cultivate that relationship. So regardless of whether you're a freshman or a senior, it is important to continue these ties. And I think periodic updates to faculty go a long way. And this is not something you need to do constantly. But if you just make a point at the end of every semester or at the end of the academic year, reach back out to all those people who you've connected with over the year and send them another thank you note and let them know how much you've appreciated the ways in which they have helped shape your undergraduate career or your sophomore year or your junior year, whatever it is. Every year, make sure that you are reaching back out to people, whether it be the start of the year and the end of the year, maybe the end of each semester, whatever timeline works for you, but you really do need to cultivate these relationships over time and don't let these connections go to waste. You do want to maintain these connections with faculty, especially once you've found people that you've developed that relationship, you've developed that connection, they are vested in your success. You want to maintain and cultivate that relationship throughout your undergraduate career and beyond. So set some times, in the calendar to just send those periodic update emails to them. Any other questions coming in? Okay, any final thoughts from Lily or Krista? Oh, one more came in.
Yes, just as you said that. Can we ask teachers or advisors from our previous colleges for letters of rec?
I think it's always going to come back to the specific criteria for the opportunity that you're applying to. You need to make sure that you're looking at what they're looking for from a recommender. I know for The grants that I run through the Office of Undergraduate Research, we specifically state that at least one needs to be from someone at UConn, but the other recommendations can be from anyone. So it's going to depend on the specific opportunity, but oftentimes if you've developed that relationship with a faculty member at another institution, whether it be through a summer program that you were part of, or maybe you started off at a different institution before you transferred to UConn, if those people know you well and you've maintained those connections and they can write a solid recommendation, and it's something that fits with the parameters of the program or opportunity that you're applying to, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't want to have them serve as a recommender. But it is going to be important to read those specific instructions for each program that you're applying to make sure they fit those criteria. Anything else come in? This is your last chance at questions. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, we're going to go ahead and conclude today's presentation, but feel free to reach out to the Office of Undergraduate Research, Pre-Professional Advising, or any of the other enrichment programs units for support as you navigate the process of getting involved and looking at what's next. We are here to support you through all of this. So thank you for joining us for today's Letters of Recommendation presentation. And we look forward to working with all of you in the future. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.